Here we are in the default scene with the cube. I'm going to select the cube, go into edit mode, check that we're in vertex mode, vertex selection mode, hit M, merge at center. Now our cube has been collapsed into a single vert. 1 out of 1 vert in the scene is selected, and it's at the original origin point of the cube, which of course is at 0, 0, 0. Keypad 1, E for extrude. And I'm going to make a simple tree. E, E, and E. Zoom in a little here. Select this vert, E, E. These are the branches. E, 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 and E. And the angle and complexity of the branches will, of course, depend on the type of tree that you're trying to make, if any. Now I'm going to click on a vert at the base of one of the branches, because you can see this tree's looking a bit flat. And I'm going to place the 3D cursor here. Shift S, which brings up the on-screen menu, cursor to selected. So now the 3D cursor is placed at the root of that branch, or at the base of that branch more accurately. Let's select the whole branch. Make sure that we're rotating around the 3D cursor and hit RZ. There we go. And we'll do the same with this branch here. Shift S, cursor to selected, C, R, Z. And maybe here I'll just move this GY a bit. GY and GX, just giving it a little bit of half convincing variation, so it looks a bit more 3D, and you can take this obviously as far as you want. Let's go back out into object mode, and I'm going to call this one tree 0, 0, 0. And we're going to give this a skin modifier. It's going to be down here, modifier and skin, generate. That's a pretty chunky tree. However, we can change this. Tab into edit mode again, and I'm going to enable wireframe so I can see it. Now we can kind of sort of see the original structure of the tree inside. Hit A to select all the verts, and then Control A to reduce the size of the skin, and there we are. Alright, I'm going to go back to solid mode. Well, that still doesn't look a lot like a tree, more like a kind of coat rack than anything else. Let's add another modifier. Subdivision surface. There we go. Now that's starting to look a bit better. And we'll just keep it at 1 degree of subdivision. If we go into object mode and I right click and hit shade smooth, doesn't make any difference. We have to go into edit mode and enable smooth shading under the skin modifier. Now we're getting something that's beginning to look a bit like a tree. Not a lot, but a bit. Let's select the base vertex. And I'm going to, before I do anything else, I'm going to go back to individual, no, let's do median point for selection about center, because the 3D cursor is still sitting up at the root of that branch, you'll notice. And then I'm going to enable proportional editing. And now I'm going to hit Control A again. And now scroll the mouse You may have to do this in several steps to refine this, but that's a good start there. Now I'll select this, Control A, reduce the influence, and now reduce the scale. Control A, Control A, and last but not least, Control A. Maybe widen the influence a bit there. Alright, so that doesn't look enormously like a tree, but it's getting there. One thing we can do is we can enable branch smoothing and sharpen it up to 1. And you can see how that tightens the transitions. Not completely, but a fair amount. Now we want to make some roots. Where are the roots of this tree going to spring from? They're going to spring from one of these verts. And they're going to spring from the original vert that was created. If you started halfway up the tree and then extended it down, you're going to have to select this and then mark root. Very appropriate in this case. We don't need to do this because this was the first one, but in other cases, like for example when you're making a stick figure for animation, then you generally start at a foot and work up, and the root of the figure should probably be at the base of the back. But anyway, there is our root, and if it's not, then we mark it like that. And again, I'm going to hit E. And then Control A. Whoa, let's not have proportional editing enabled anymore. Control A and E and Control A. Click on the base. E. You notice you get some weird stuff happening when you're just beginning to extrude the root, but don't worry about it. In most cases, the geometry will fix itself, and if it doesn't, then it's very easy to hit Control Z. Control A, and again maybe E, Control A, and there's a limit to how far we can take this, obviously, but you get the idea. And see here we've got some really nasty looking geometry happening, but I hit Control A and it cleans itself up pretty well. E and Control A, and again maybe E and Control A. Alright, so I'm gonna say that's very close to what we want. This is yeah, see, this is not looking good, so I need to, oh, it's definitely not looking good. So let's go into wireframe mode and just look at this particular vert and just Control A, reduce it slightly. Yeah, that's better. So because this configures dynamically, you've got to work around its limitations. That's kind of a Halloween tree, but that's appropriate because it's middle of October. That, I think, is good for our tree at the moment. I'm going to look at it from the front view, keypad 1. Maybe just flatten these, maybe not that one, flatten these roots out a bit, because I'm going to sink this into the ground. Tab out into object mode. That's our tree, and I'm going to say okay, that's good for now, and obviously we can continue with this as long as we want. Let's add a material to it. It's going to be tree, and it's going to be brownish. So let's go southwest here and reduce the value and reduce the specularity, increase the roughness, and that looks, yeah, just about what we want. Good. We can also add a texture to it. Now I'm going to add some ground. Shift A, mesh plane, scale it up, Control A. You'll notice Control A now in object mode actually applies the transforms, whereas in edit mode it changes the skin modifier. Just be aware everything is dependent on the context. And I'll put the tree up here. It's looking vaguely like it's walking on the landscape. So let's add some detail to the ground, which incidentally I'm going to call 2_ground. Currently, if we go into edit mode, we can see it's got 4 verts. It's just a default plane. And you would think we could add detail to it by subdividing it and either using proportional editing or using a displace modifier, but we're going to do something else this time. We're going to go from object mode into sculpt mode. Sculpt mode is something I haven't talked about before. It's very interesting and very versatile, but because of the nature of my work I don't use it very much. However, there are a great many very good tutorials and indeed courses for free available on YouTube. When we go into sculpt mode, and I don't actually have the defaults running right now, so what I should do is to hit first T to bring in the tools, a lot of very interesting tools, and N to bring in the right hand fly-in and go to the details for that particular tool. It defaults to mirror along the X. So when we bring our tool in, whatever it is, it's actually mirrored around the X-axis. First thing you want to do is to go and turn that off. Second thing you want to do is to enable dynamic topology, and you will get this warning. Just ignore it, hit OK. So now I can start to work in this very low poly plane, but look at what it does, and let's look at what it does in wireframe. There's our ground, and you notice it's triangulated. Sculpt mode only works in tries, so it's showing the triangulation of this flat quad. And if I use this particular tool, the draw tool, which is the default, and go over the surface, look at what it's doing. It's adding detail just in the area where I'm changing the ground. If I zoom in, I can add even finer detail and even finer detail than that, depending on how far I zoom in. So level of detail depends on view. You can change this, but this is a pretty good default. Now, if I go back into solid mode, I can start to move the ground up and down around the tree. Trees obviously draw their material from the ground surrounding them, so they generally pull material away. They're generally sitting in a little hollow if left to their own devices. So let's make a hollow. I hold down Control to remove material, or more accurately to move it down instead of moving it up. I'm going to add some here to hide this little root, and maybe also to add this one. Okay, and let's go further out and let's add some more detail at a large scale to this landscape, such as it is. And there are lots of tools here. I'm not going to even begin to go through them all. You'll have fun finding out about them. Particularly if you want to create characters. And this is where the Sculpt tool really comes into its own, and also obviously the reason for it having a default X symmetry property when you fire it up, because most characters are largely symmetrical about their x-axis, at least to start with. Alright, I'm going to say that's pretty good. Looks a bit like a snowdrift. Now we're getting a Christmas vibe from this Halloween tree, but that's good to me. Back into object mode. Let's go into viewport shading, give it some kind of vague material, and yeah, you've guessed it, it's going to be a low value, low specular, high roughness green. And there we go. Right, so that's what I'm going to give it for the ground. I think that's pretty good. We've got a little glitch there, but we can fix that later. Next, we want to think about making some foliage. So let's begin by saving our file and then cleaning up. I'm going to hit T and N and then hide the tree and the ground. Make sure that the cursor is back at 0, 0, 0. So that's going to be under View, 3D Cursor, Location, 0, Tab, 0, Tab, 0, Enter. And then hit N one more time. I'm going to add a plane again. And this plane is going to be 2 underscore leaf. Is it going to be leaf 0, 0, 0? No, it's just going to be leaf. And you'll see why later on. Let's look at this from the top. Keypad 7. I'll scale it down. And then I'll apply that scale. Go into edit mode. And SX. Hit 2 to enable edge mode. E, Y, and S, E, Y, and S, G, Y, E, Y. Remember, I have to put the axis in because I'm extruding edges, not faces. S and EY S. So that's my leaf. Control R and put one edge loop right in the middle of the leaf. And I'll switch to orthographic from this point. Right, 1 G Z G Z. And let's give this just a little GZ, smooth the geometry, GZ. It's kind of sort of looking like a leaf. Move all of this along, GY. And then select the verts at the end. Enable proportional editing and use the and make the center of operations the 3D cursor R. There we go. Something a bit like that. So that it's got a nice three-dimensional form to it. And now, with these 3 at the end selected, and with proportional editing enabled, and with the 3D cursor as the center of operations, as the pivot point, I'll hit R. And now I can curve this leaf up and down. In fact, I think I may want to separately rotate them. There we go. So now we've got a nice even curve along the length of the leaf. And now all I want to do is to add a subdivision surface. Modifier, subdivision surface. Let's just make it viewport 1, and now we've got a reasonable looking leaf. But this isn't all we want to do. We want to add a stalk to it. So I'm going to do something that we don't do very often. I'm going to add a cylinder into edit mode. Shift A, and when we do that in edit mode, all we can add are other meshes, and they become part of the same object. So here we are with the cylinder. Let's add that, and oh, now we can see a problem. That's also got the same subdivision surface modifier applied to it as we added to the leaf. So I'm going to get rid of that for the moment. No subdivision surface modifier. Add a cylinder. What's that cylinder going to be? I don't want so many verts. So let's take it down to 8 in fact. That's probably good, and it's absolutely huge. So I'll select 1 and Control L, because remember I don't want to select the verts on the leaf as well, which I would if I hit A, and just scale it down to the point where it's of the right general size for the stalk of a leaf. RX90, enter. Keypad 7, GY, S, and then look at it from the side. Well, that would be 3 on the keypad, and just SY. And you notice it's scaling around the origin point. Need to be careful about this. Let's go back to median point, SY, there we go, GY, GZ, R, period on the keypad, and go into face select mode with alphanumeric 3, and just hit E. Again, look at it from the side, keypad 3, and here, yeah, let's just select this face, GZ, maybe R. So there's a certain amount of work to do here. I'm not going to do this tremendously carefully. E, 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 3 on the keypad, 2, alphanumeric 2, Alt click to select the edge loop, G, Alt click, G, and because we're dealing on a fairly small scale, it's being a bit twitchy, Alt click, G, Z, because I'm in a perspective view now, not an ortho view, so I have to include the direction. If I'm in an ortho view and I select an edge loop, then I can just hit G and it stays in the plane of the viewport, and that looks good to me. Right, so now I want to scale this along its length. We've got to be a bit careful. Let's go G and Y here. G. If I enable proportional editing up here, and I then hit S, I'm scaling the leaf as well as the twig, which isn't going to work for us. So how do we do this? In proportional editing, under the drop-down menu, connected only. Now, when I hit S, it's only scaling the connected verts and edges. And that isn't actually working for us. So let's go to faces, alphanumeric 3, see how that does, and S, that's a little better. It's doing some strange things to the edge loops, but it is scaling along its length, which is what we want. So I'm going to say that's fine. And next I'm going to disable proportional editing, go back to alphanumeric 2, Alt-click G. So I want to have these partly moving through the leaf. Alt-click. Here I've got to be careful. If I want to move it along here, I can't just use G, because it's going to take its scale along with it, and we're going to get an uneven tapering along the length of the twig. So GG. GG, move along existing geometry, doesn't change the scale. So as I move down here, this edge loop automatically increases in size along the existing geometry to compensate. Alt, click, GG, G, and finally Alt-click G, something kind of sort of like that. There is our leaf. And let's hit alphanumeric 3, GY, and GZ. Okay. Do we want to add a subdivision surface to this? Well, let's just see what it does for us. Subdivision surface. It's actually not too bad. Yeah, it messes up our curve a little bit. So if I had a bit more time, I would adjust this. But as it is, I'm going to say, no, I'm not going to bother with this. So no subdivision surface. We'll just make it smooth shaded. Let's look at it here. Shaded mode. And I'm going to select the connected faces. So that's going to be Control L, that just selects the leaf. And we're going to add a material, and let's just be lazy and add the ground material. Then I'm going to add a new material, and I'm going to add, again, being lazy, I'll just add the tree material, which is a sort of brown. Click on a twig face, Control L, assign. Well, that didn't work because I didn't have the tree material selected. When I hit Control L, assign, now I do, and now we've got a reasonable looking little stem running along the leaf. Back into object mode with a certain amount of relief. Right click, shade smooth. Okay, and yeah, it's got a chunky outline. It's got a slightly jaggy outline. But I could have done a number of things here. I could, in fact, have added a subdivision surface modifier to the leaf and then applied it before bringing in the stem, but I didn't, so I'm not going to worry about it. Let's look at this from the top. Keypad 7. Very important. Remember that the origin point is going to be where the leaf grows out of the tree trunk. It's not going to look too good if it's like that. So back into edit mode, A to select everything, G, Y. Move it up like that. And you know what? It's not going to look too good if it's just one leaf, but let's not worry about that right now. Let's go back out into object mode and bring in the tree. Here is our tree. And the leaf actually looks about the right scale, rather to my surprise, but, well, it could very easily not be the right scale. Doesn't make any difference. Select the tree, and let's add a particle system. particle system, what's it going to be? It's going to be hair, advanced hair, and under render, it's not going to be a path, it's going to be an object, and an object is going to be the leaf. But we're not seeing any leaves. Why not? Well, if we select the tree, we'll notice that there's a little wrench icon next to it in the outliner, and that of course is the skin modifier. We need to apply these. We need to create a mesh out of the tree, because remember, the tree doesn't actually exist. It's just a bunch of lines. Making sure we're in object mode, apply. Whoa, now you can see the leaves because it's actually got some geometry. We could apply the Catmull Clark as well. In fact, I think I'm going to do that just to get a bit more geometry, and you'll see the number of leaves increases because we've got more detailed geometry with the subdivision surface modifier applied. This is not looking like we really want our tree to look, so let's create a weight paint along the tree. I'll hide the particle system because that's just not going to help us, and that's the little monitor icon, and we'll start to add a weight paint. Look at it, I think, in wireframe, which is generally easier. In wireframe, you'll notice it doesn't go right through the mesh. However, if we enable X-ray so that we can actually see through the mesh, it's still not doing it particularly well. This is something that the previous versions of Blender actually did rather better, and I think this is still an unrecognized bug in 2.8.3.7, which is frankly not good, but we just have to make sure that we check both sides of our branches and make sure that this is enabled. But it should be coming in by default, which is, as I say, a little disappointing. And yeah, I think that's probably good for our tree. And now we go down to object data. I'm going to rename this as foliage. Go back to particle settings, enable particle settings, and then go down to the foot to vertex groups, density, foliage. And then we'll look at this again here. Not in weight paint, but in object mode. So that's looking a little better. It's a slightly comical looking tree, to be honest, but we can add some more detail to it very quickly, like this. Let's select the leaf and go into top view, keypad 7, edit mode, A, G, R, Shift D, R, G, Shift D, R, S, G. Select something on this leaf and this twig, Control L, G, and again 1, 2, Control L, G, 1, 2, Control L, RX, G, Z. And you can see how we can build up a spray of leaves around a central stalk. And I'm not going to do this because this video's gone on long enough, but let's go back into object mode, always bearing in mind that this origin point for this group, or for this object, it's just one leaf. That was why I just called it one leaf. Is going to be where it attaches to the trunk. So maybe keypad 7, edit mode, A, G in top view, look at it in side view. Yeah, that's going to be a problem, so G in side view, and that's fine. Back into object mode, hide it, and re-enable the tree. And now, by magic, where there were leaves before, there are now bunches of leaves. Let's do one more thing before we end the video. Let's go to the top here, make sure advanced is checked. It's not checked by default. And we'll choose rotation, phase. So now you can see these leaves are all starting to rotate. And scale, I'm going to increase the scale, but I'm also going to increase the randomness of the scale. So some of these are being scaled more than others. And right, that's I think all we really want to do. Let's bring back the ground and let's look at this. And the leaves are obviously fading into the ground because it's exactly the same green. But you get the idea of how you can start to build up leaves and foliage on a tree, and then of course you can distribute the trees themselves with their foliage over the landscape. So with a very little original geometry you can make a forest. I'm going to stop at this point and you can take it from here.